Welcome, everybody. Episode 153, Two Chaps, Many Cultures, this wonderful Wednesday. And today we're talking about intercultural relationships, marriages, connections, any type of relationship. But in this case, we're talking about intimate relationships between two loving people who find each other attractive. And that may, more increasingly today, involve cross-cultural communications and interactions. So we're going to talk about that today and top tips for at least maybe preparing yourself ahead of time or even while you're initially in the stages of a intercultural relationship. Stick around. Yes, welcome back to the show about the business of culture and the culture of business. And of course, there is no other business like love business, is there, mate?
I don't know. Is it a business?
Well, sometimes
it's the oldest business.
You know, well, it is. And it involves negotiations, yeah, even good sales techniques.
Oh, yes.
Good sales techniques.
It took a good salesman to sell this to my wife. I mean, hello. It wasn't easy.
Absolutely. It is a process. It is a process. And what was your marketing like? That's what I want to know. What was your marketing funnel?
My funnel was very bad at that time. I think I got really lucky. I think I was able to score out of my league and didn't do much. Or as
in an Australian in an Australian context, we call it batting out of our crease.
There we go.
We use the cricket analogy, right? And batting out of your crease is an uncomfortable place to be, and a place you probably shouldn't have no deserving right to be. But I can certainly agree with you. I'm in the same position.
Well, now after all these years, I say, well, of course I deserve that.
Yes.
There was a reason for that. Now,
absolutely.
I only jokingly say sometimes that my wife and I are in a intercultural relationship. Most people probably will not see it that way because, well, my wife and I, we were from the same culture, we have the same passport identity, but she comes from a different part of Germany. So people will tell you that my part of Germany and her part of Germany don't always see eye to eye. So we've had to negotiate a little bit around that. But in the technical terms or in the definition that we're outlining here today, I think my relationship with my wife is probably not a good example. However, I know you, Brett, and we've mentioned this a few times here on this program, you and your loved one are from distinctly different parts of the world, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Opposite ends of the earth, which is, obviously great. It was what I found, really intoxicating and exotic about this wonderful person that I met, because she was from the other side of the planet, speaking more languages than I've forgotten. She's forgotten more languages than I'll ever speak. And basically having this also historical, or I guess a real world experience of something that I viewed from an historical point of view from the other side of the world, in terms of her experience living in Poland, for example, behind the Iron Curtain, growing up in that type of environment. And so it's fascinating to me, the stories that both her and her family tells about that time. This was really, for me, apart from, meeting a beautiful person with a wonderful personality and somebody who loves you, adding that extra dimension was just fascinating for me, because this is a world that I had no access to apart from, the remembrance of news stories and things like that.
Right.
So, yeah, it was.
Now, You grew up in the greater Sydney area, right? So which would be considered one of the more, if not the most diverse urban environments in the Asia Pacific region. Have you not always been exposed to potential partners, mates, growing up as a teenager, young adult? Were you not, like, I don't want to sound corny teenager, like, but were you not on the prowl in and around the bars and the pubs and the hangout places of your city, and were you not exposed to potential partners or love interests that looked and behaved differently from you?
Oh, yeah, all the time. Absolutely. It is a very diverse, and I guess even doing the activities that I did, like singing in bands and things like that, you know, in tourist spots, you were even exposed not to people that just live there, but people that were visiting. So yeah, absolutely. Definitely an exposure to it. But I think that, you know, obviously that spark of meeting somebody that you're attracted to is, you know, and as a potential long-term partner is a different different scenario. And so I didn't, you know, have that until I moved to the US, you know, and it's part of the reason I'm still here. So I guess then, you know, and I can really pinpoint once we got past that and we got to, you know, starting to recognize some of the differences that took place. There was probably, even just like all relationships, they always go through kind of some difficult times and things like that. But some of these things could be directly pinpointed on the cultural differences. And this is, I'm talking about just in this case, styles, communication styles and things like that. Luckily, didn't have to really navigate any negative biases from either of our families that might have existed, because, you know, we didn't really have to navigate that. There's some funny little stories, like my first time going to Poland, and, you know, of course, we'd been dating for a little while, and but my first time going to Poland and then realizing we weren't married yet, but certainly Marta's family, you know, we were given separate rooms to sleep in. You know, this is a very interesting thing as somebody who's kind of, you think you've grown up at like 35 or something like that, and now you're kind of being treated like two teenagers at the other end of the house. You know?
Yes, so you were not 18 when that happened, right? So this was,
right,
you were
right.
a grown-ass man, right?
I absolutely. But, you know, it was something that I didn't question too much. I mean, I kind of thought, well, how, you know, I can look at that. That's a pretty innocuous type of situation where you can look at that and go, well, actually, that's pretty quaint. And it, you know, and if from a traditional point of view, you can see where it makes sense. So that's kind of a very small little bump in the road that you might think, right? But you know, when it obviously comes to intercultural and also interracial marriages, which is probably the deeper aspect of it, where you can come across more of these problems, that's where we're kind of talking today about how to prepare yourself. And we're going to put a tip sheet in, just some considerations for doing that. And I think right at the start, I was reflecting on this and thinking, why not start now? Why not do it even if you're a single person? Getting ready for these conversations, preparing your family for these conversations. If you feel there's a really high chance that you might meet somebody that's either a different race or a different culture,
right,
that you can actually learn, first of all, do your own work, right? That's the thing.
And this happens, and as we wrote in the intro to this episode, this happens more now than it has happened before. And we're not talking necessarily I don't like interracial, I don't like the term, but between different relationships between different ethnicities. Right. Yes, that happens too. But both you and your wife, you're both Caucasian, you're both white, and yet you're culturally distinctly different. You grew up speaking different languages. You grew up in different rule systems and different moral frameworks, right? So ethnicity would add another layer to it, but it was already, there were enough differences between the two of you and your two families as is, right? So we don't even need that layer to make an intercultural relationship somewhat of, I don't want to say a challenge, but a little bit different, right? And if I look back, and in preparation for this episode, I thought about this growing up in my young adulthood, when I saw my friends and acquaintances around in my circles who they dated, who they started relationships with, and it was predominantly same on same. And there were, at our wedding, we had a fairly, by German standards, a fairly small wedding. And the only couple at our wedding that was interracial or intercultural, well, there was only one couple out of the 80, 90 guests we had at our wedding, right? And that was a looker. For the more conservative people at our wedding, they were like, ooh, a white man and a black woman. Ooh, what's going on here? Because they didn't know them, right? But that was, for a minute or two, that was a topic of conversation. And then it passed. But looking around my circles that I interact with now, whether it be here in the US or back in Europe, the number of intercultural relationships that I see in my immediate circles has skyrocketed compared to 20, 30 years ago. And it may simply be because I live a more, I don't know, global life than I did back then, quite possibly. I don't know, but this is just an evidence, but to me it appears that it has become more common to see people becoming life partners, or at least long-term relationships coming from different cultural backgrounds. And as I'm saying this, I want you, as you're watching this live or as a recording, let us know where in the world you're joining us from, and maybe also want to let us know what culture you identify predominantly. You may identify with several cultures. Let us know that as well. And if you are in a relationship that includes a partner that is from a different part of the world, from a different cultural background, we'd love to hear your comments. We're by no means the experts on this. We simply wanted to jump on that topic because it is something that we see in our daily lives, and we're curious how others are making it work. So let us know questions, ideas, comments. Yeah. So Brett, the number one tip you had, and we're going to share this in that worksheet you'll get from us. We'll give you a link at the end of the episode where you can download that. But what's your first tip? You said you got to do your own work, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is important in any, like we talk about this in business, right? It's about exploring your own. Certainly, you can even explore your own biases and your own preconceptions of other cultures. And so even before you potentially meet somebody from another culture, or then you have to kind of identify what makes you tick. What are the values you hold, and what is the potential that those values you hold may be different from the person you meet? And I think this would exist in even a somebody or two people from the same culture. But it really is exacerbated when you meet somebody, and of course, in the kind of the wonderful warmth of the new relationship, these topics kind of tend to be put aside until you get to the reality of life, right. And so that also I think you're doing your potential partner or the partner you've already got a real. I mean, this is one of the loving processes: is that you're giving them the grace to say, look, I really want to know about myself before I can be the best possible partner for you. And in that way, can we both do this process, right? Encourage each other to do your own work. And we often, why not use a cultural assessment tool even, right? To kind of evaluate what your preferred, even if it comes, as I mentioned before, communication style, somebody who is very direct versus very indirect. I mean, this is just it seems so simple on the surface, but if you've got a partner that is always kind of really direct, in your face type of communication and confronting you with things you find offensive, then they may be doing it actually because they've found in their life and they've been brought up to believe that works, and that's honesty and that's loving. You know, that's that simple example where you can kind of realize, and is there a point where you can, you know, as we talked about before, the zone of appropriateness, like Annie Malinsky points out. How far can you stretch and come together to realize that you're doing it right. It's an important thing to do, I think. Yeah.
Now, the interesting aspect to this is, while I completely agree with you, if you had told me this at age 17, 18, 19, when I really began being interested in other people seriously, not just in a teenage kind of way, but like, hey, can we make this work? Or you want to sleep over and you want to have more meals together and hang out more? If you had broached that subject and say, well, I know who I am, well, why do I need to do some work on myself? That's nonsense. And so I think it comes with a certain level of maturity that someone might be open to doing the work on themselves, right? And
well, here's an aspect. Sorry to cut you off, but here's an aspect I just thought of as you said that. If you're a parent of a child who, because and we both have children that are coming up and we're raising them globally, right? We're raising them with lots of travel, lots of languages, lots of exposure to different people. There's a good chance that they're going to meet people from different cultures. So why not, as a loving parent, prepare your children for this by leading them to this kind of work, because they're probably not going to do it themselves, as you say. We're just basically looking for something to chase.
That's actually an excellent point, because my oldest daughter, she's now 18, and she's been through relationships already, and I recognize that she is a lot more mature about this than I ever was at her age. And the young man she's been, there was the first low interest with a young man she met while she was in school on exchange in Germany. So she was back in her parents' and her birth culture, and then there was budding romance, but I'm not sure how serious it was. And then she had a boyfriend here that's American, and initially I recognized how she struggled with his codependence and with his inability to be assertive and mastering this thing called adult life. And she was already this like, come on, get your shit together. Well, what's going on? she was very impatient, very German, in fact, even though she was raised predominantly in the United States. Now that you mentioned it,
fall far from the tree, does it?
Yeah, and then she had this one fairly brief relationship with a young man who was also raised in the U.S. but has some South American cultural heritage, and that was completely different. Their communication was completely different. So you're actually alerting me to this, because I downplayed this. Oh, come on, she's 18 and she'll find out what she likes and what she doesn't like. But you're spot on. And she does it. And I'm proud to report that she's much more mature than I ever was at 18. So she's done the work. She has begun doing the work on herself, knowing how she would like to treat others and how she likes to be treated and what she expects of a relationship. And that is, I applaud her for that. I'm not sure I don't think she's watching this, but,
well, is that something that you should consider as a process for budding suitors? Is to before we go much further, I'm going to give you a session with my dad as an intercultural trainer.
Yeah,
and, not that it's threatening enough, right?
Not do that. But once these young gentlemen meet me, they I think. I don't want to say they're intimidated by my wife and I, but I think they are. Because and if they are, I think I'm doing my job. It's okay. It's okay.
Well, there's got to be a certain level of that. There's got to be a certain level of that. But the poor guy that turns up is going to not be aware of the German style of interaction.
Well,
so then
I think my daughter preps them for that. I think they prep them. My oldest I know is aware of this enough, and she will tell them, "Oh, be prepared. My parents are quite straightforward and direct, and they don't hold back." So she tells them that.
Good.
But then again, I think she's now at an age where she allows her, whenever she brings somebody that we haven't met into our home, and that doesn't have to be a love interest, could just be a friend, a new,
Yeah.
I don't know, somebody that she hangs out with, and she kind of lets them test the waters on their own, and say, let's see how they handle my family, and that will tell me a little bit about that person. So she's already taken that to the next level. I do want to acknowledge a comment that I saw on LinkedIn that's not showing up here in the live feed,
Oh.
but that was posted on the show announcement here by a friend here in Atlanta, Antoinette Geiger, originally from Switzerland. And she too is in an intercultural relationship, and she says, I've been in an intercultural relationship for 12 years and had an aha moment recently when reading The Culture Map by Erin Meyer. So Culture Map, those of you who haven't read it yet, that's what she's talking about, The Culture Map by Erin Meyer. And Antoinette says, particularly the reading between the lines, so indirect communication styles that some cultures have mastered, that has been apparently something that she struggled with. Okay, so Swiss German, more direct in communication, maybe not as direct as the Germans, but still reading between the lines compared to the culture of her partner, which I know is probably going to be much more indirect than her style. Yes, so even after 12 years, that might be something that you need to reconcile, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And of course, that takes us maybe to our second point, and that is just understand there's no right or wrong in this. And that's kind of the big learning, or the humility you have to bring to any relationship, is to understand that what you do is good for you and is right for you. What the other person that you initially perceive, what their behavior or their actions may be perceived as wrong, or you may have been brought up to see that as something that's not appropriate. But in their culture, it may be totally appropriate. It is actually the way that they do their business and their social life in general. So there is no, if you just come at it and say, I'm just going to completely suspend any judgment here and say, I'm going to actually be curious. I'm going to observe. I'm certainly going to be curiously asking questions intently with the positive intention of saying, I'm asking to understand, because I understand that my visceral response is that this is wrong, but it may not be for you. And I want to give you that grace. So that's an important thing. It's a really, I mean, all these things are enriching conversations, are they not, to have with somebody that you potentially are looking at a long-term relationship with?
But I think the fallacy that we're all susceptible to is that we at some point believe, well, don't we know each other so well by now? Haven't we spent so much time together already that both of us should be aware of how we like to behave with each other, be with each other, and what the behavioral expectations would be of each other. And the shoulding is the problem, I think. One of my mentors once told me, stop shoulding all over yourself. Because the shoulding is setting expectations that may not be shared by the other people. And after all these years, I mean, my wife and I will be married for 20 years this summer. Yes, there are still occasions where we mismanage each other's expectations. So I don't think that'll ever go away. I think that'll follow us in any long-term relationship. You will catch yourself off guard a little bit. Like, well, I wanted it this way, but didn't you want it that way too? I thought you should know that I want it this way. Well, I thought you should know. So this is something that it doesn't hurt to remind yourself that there is no right or no wrong. There's in a partnership, in a relationship, it takes constant reminders and reevaluation of what the common denominator might be.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, that certainly happens in my relationship. I think it's a good term, mismanagement, right? It's not a mismanagement is a good term, because you're thinking about it as like I've missed something. I really haven't done it. I'm humbly coming to it and saying, I admit that I probably didn't approach that the right way. and I haven't used the skill sets I probably have in the right way, and to manage each other's expectations, or at least recognize them, right? Which kind of might roll into our third point, and that is the old 2 ears and 1 mouth type of approach, which is even more difficult when you're kind of got 2 people that communicate in different ways, right? That is certainly the one aspect, and I know it's beaten to death in all types of areas of life, business and personal interactions. But when it comes to relationships, I guess, and I'm not a marriage counselor, I'm not ever trained that way, but I've spoken to a few, and it is kind of leading people to just be quiet, just to listen, really intently listen, to hear and not respond, not be that kind of I'm listening, but I'm listening because I just want to make sure I'm forming my own argument against it, that kind of approach. It's a very important thing. It's very hard to do. We're not saying any of this is easy, even in normal relationships, but I guess it can be even more complicated in intercultural relationships, where those expectations, as you say, managing those expectations can be harder. Yeah.
Now, I think even though you might think as a couple you've figured it out, or you at least have a basic foundation how to reconcile differences as they reappear or appear anew in your time spent together, there will be the moment when you recognize that having a long-term relationship comes with more than the 2 of you. Each of you has brought in baggage into the relationship in the form of your families, your relationships, your prior relationships, your work relationships, your worldviews that are shaped by you or have been shaped by your environment, right? So there might be some challenging conversations here and there if you bring into your life a partner from a different culture. You might be very well prepared, or you might be getting better at handling the differences. What about your family? What about your parents? What about your friends? They may not be as open to this. So how are you going to have those conversations, and who are you going to have them with, right?
Absolutely. So and it'll be different for each culture. I mean, this is again getting back and recognizing who in your family will want to be considered in your decision. You might think, this is my decision, I'm an individual, and it is my decision. But if you culturally take a look back in the historical framework, that maybe your parents and your grandparents and your other, and even your siblings, there are certainly situations where we've seen 2 children grow up in the same family. One holds on to the deep traditions of their family, and the other one moves away from them. So there can be disconnect there. So, again, recognizing that the possibility for having to have tough conversations, and who they involve, right? Being respectful of whether your partner, what point and how does your partner then become a part of that situation? Certainly, just for some families, fronting up on the doorstep with somebody from a completely different culture, looking and sounding and speaking different languages, is going to might be a bit of a shock, if you don't prepare your family for that.
It didn't happen to me, but it happened in my immediate circle of friends. There was a friend from college days. She fell in love with a young man from Nigeria, and she brought him home, and her rather conservative Southern German white parents were a little taken aback, and there were questions like, did it have to be a black guy? Seriously, that's what happened. And she was like, this is the man I love, and this is how my family responds to this. And half a year later, the father, who was originally a little bit worried about the ethnicity of her daughter's boyfriend, was already up in their new house's attic fixing holes in the roof. Like it changed quickly, but the initial knee-jerk reaction was one of prejudice and bias and stereotype. And be ready for this, right? There might be a different religion involved, and there might be, I don't know, the religious spiritual guide in your family that may need to be involved in this. What you're marrying outside of or you are engaging in a relationship outside of your faith. How will this work? and maybe your family will bring in the spiritual leaders of your community in order to help them wrap their head around the relationship performing. So there are so many aspects in this, that it involves, maybe in the beginning it's the two of you that are figuring out the differences and how the attraction can brush over the behavioral differences that may not play so much into the relationship in the beginning, but after a while, when the butterflies settle down, you recognize, oh, this is a bit different now. But it's not just the two of you. There's more involved, and be ready for this. Be prepared that these conversations will happen, and they may not always be pretty.
Absolutely. No, it's a big subject. I think it's a fascinating subject, one that I could talk about all day, because it's there's so many considerations for it. Because essentially, we want, everybody wants to come together and join. If you're joining two families from two different cultures, some real magic can happen. I mean, watching for the first time my mother, mother at least, meeting Marta's mother, and when you've got families from the other side of the world, and you think, well, this has probably never ever happened. And then actually watching that first interaction between two women, and I'm talking about just mothers at this point, but just two women who are coming together to embrace each other as, and figure that it was a really touching moment for me, because I thought this would not have happened unless we made it happen as a couple, right? These things, this is changing the family tree. This is a really drastically diverging from the traditions of what I had back home and what Marta had back home. So it can be so enriching if you do it the right way and approach it the right way. I'm not saying we did. I'm sure we made mistakes. But again, we were very lucky because it was kind of pretty innocuous. There wasn't a lot of bumps to go over, but we can imagine that for those out there that are navigating this or are contemplating this, it can be a big subject. And just we would, this tip sheet that we're putting up here is free. It's a starting point to perhaps share with your potential partner, or put in your pocket next time you meet a potential partner, to share with them and say, if you're, I'd really like to have this conversation with you. I'd really like to open this as something that we need to consider, because if we don't, you could lose something that is very special, and to lose it for the cultural reasons, it's like having a normal business merger and acquisition fall apart for cultural reasons. That's kind of a pretty silly reason to have it happen,
True. And that's why we put those tips together in a written format. So go ahead, check it out here. Either write it down what you see on the screen, or check the comment box. I posted the link in the comment box, so you can pick it up from there. We also are going to continue this conversation over on Clubhouse, actually right now as we wrap this up. So if you want to talk about this and weigh in and give us your 2 cents on this, join us on Clubhouse. We're going to wrap this up here now. And you can only do this if you're watching this live. If you're watching the recording, unfortunately, the Clubhouse will have already concluded. But next time, remember, there's going to be a Clubhouse on Wednesday, and we're going to talk about this without the video. So for now, we're good. For now, let's talk about this more without the video. Two Chaps, Many Cultures. We're out for now, and we'll see you again tomorrow. Ciao.
Bye-bye. See you.